Welcome, welcome, welcome to the wonderful world of penguin poo, shag spew, and all those other wonderful accompaniments to seabird research. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. I'm the host of the Bird Emergency. Sitting there is Jeff White, who I now have to address as Dr. Jeff White. And Jeff is in Miami. I'm in Melbourne, the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people here in Australia. Jeff's just completed his PhD working on the amazing Tawaki, or the Fiordland penguin, or the Fiordland Crested Penguin. And I think, was it once known as the Snares Crested Penguin as well? I think when I was about 9 or 10, that's what it was called in my bird books.
Yeah, I think they split it up. They split the two, and so now they're two separate species. But yeah.
So anyway, we've talked about the Tawaki, the amazing penguin from the very south of the South Island of New Zealand before, but Jeff's now a confirmed expert on the feeding habits of the Tawaki, and more specifically, the isotopic and trophic preferences. I think that's. I was having trouble understanding what the isotopic part of the research was. So, Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, you got it. You had it just right. Yeah. So, foraging ecology is really my specialty, whether it's with the Tawaki or some other species of penguins as well. But within that, stable isotopes is kind of the main method that I use for understanding what they're eating.
Okay, so let me see if I can dumb it down enough for people to get a grip on it. There's going to be certain types of isotopes that can be easily discovered by using a spectrometer. Is that right?
Yep.
So you are getting that information from food content, from stomach contents?
Not necessarily stomach contents. You can do that. But in my case, I am looking at the tissues from the birds. So usually blood samples, also feathers. And so you're exactly right. There's different isotopes, which are variations of a particular element. And by measuring those, we can get a lot of information about where an animal is feeding within the environment, and also what it's feeding on, or at least what level in the food web it's feeding.
Because different isotopes are present in, for instance, squid or shrimp or mackerel or...
Yeah, so a lot of that depends on where in the food web that food item might be. So for example, one of the isotopes that I'm most interested in is nitrogen 15, so the variation of nitrogen. And what's unique about it is it changes in a predictable way as you move up the food chain. So you can take a measurement in, say, a penguin, and based on the number you get there, the value you get there, you can go stepwise backwards to kind of figure out what that bird is eating within that system. So you're able to take nitrogen and other isotopes from the prey that it might be eating and compare that to the bird's tissues itself to understand kind of how much or how important various prey items are to the penguin.
So is it the concentration of nitrogen 15 that is present in either the fat tissue or the blood that helps you determine that?
Yeah, so we measure the nitrogen or other isotopes against some international standards, so it's all just relative to that standard. For nitrogen, it's the amount of nitrogen in the air, for example. But yeah, exactly. So we measured that value relative to that standard, and that tells us where in the food chain we are. So, for example, with the penguins, I might get a nitrogen value of 11 or 12, right? And that's in units per mil.
Yeah.
You would expect something like a fish that it's eating to be anywhere from 2 to 4 per mil lower than that. So you would expect fish to be maybe in the, 6 to 8 per mil. And so when you look at the tissue in the penguin, and you've also gathered stable isotopes from fish, from squid, from krill, in theory, you should be able to identify which of those food groups or prey items the penguin is mostly foraging on. So if their isotope values are very high in nitrogen, they're likely also eating prey that is very high in nitrogen, so larger fish. If it's very low in nitrogen, they're probably eating prey that's lower down on the food web, which would be something like krill, most likely. And so there's all sorts of complex mixing of different food sources, so it's not quite as straightforward as we would hope it would be. But we can account for that with models to figure out their contribution of these different items to their diet.
I don't know whether your mind has ever gone here, Jeff, but straight away I've gone to, okay, so what would my reading in be expected to be in Melbourne, in Australia, as a vegetarian?
Sure.
Compared to someone living maybe in the northern or southern islands of Japan, who is primarily a seafood eater?
Sure. Yeah. So I would think your nitrogen values would probably be lower because you're eating things that are down at the bottom of the food chain if you're eating mostly vegetation, right? As opposed to fish, which are typically very high in the nitrogen content. The other thing to consider with that is carbon is another really key isotope that we use. And carbon is going to vary by a lot of different things, but one of the ways that it varies is by the type of photosynthesis that plants are undergoing. So whether it's a C3, a C4 plant, things like that, really makes a difference in carbon values.
And the C3 or C4 value, is that more determinant on the type of plant?
Yes.
It is, and its place in the ecological niche?
Yeah, so typically things like grains, so for example, like corns, things like that, are going to look very different isotopically than other types of plants like legumes.
Than a redwood.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, there actually have been some studies done that have looked at humans from North America, where we have a lot of corn in our diet, and compared that to European diets that don't eat as much corn. And there's actually a pretty big difference there in carbon. In terms of seabirds, or in this example too, with the people in Japan that are eating lots of fish, carbon also varies in the ocean. One way is by latitude. So it's going to typically have very different values near the equator than it would near the poles.
And that's temperature dependent, do you think?
Yeah, it's primarily
temperature linked.
It is in a way. So it's related to productivity in the ocean.
Okay.
So if it's more productive waters, it's going to have a higher productivity. It's going to be different carbon values in these really nutrient poor systems.
Yeah. So again, probably some of those Arctic and Antarctic systems that where there are lots of colonies of seabirds.
Yep.
They're probably quite rich compared to somewhere like, I don't know, the Florida Keys. Perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, generally what you would expect is when you increase in latitude, so you're moving towards the poles, you generally expect the carbon-13 value, which is what we use, to get increasingly negative. So you'll get lower and lower values of carbon towards the poles. And so we can use that in the penguins, for example, when they go out to sea in the non-breeding season. We can look at those carbon values and really see the difference between them foraging near the coast of New Zealand during the breeding season versus foraging farther south in subantarctic waters outside the breeding season. And that carbon value is really important there.
Okay. Now, let's just do a little bit more basic rudimentary chemistry.
Sure.
nitrogen 15.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 15 protons or neutrons?
Yep. So they differ in protons.
Okay.
Yep. And so when we say nitrogen 15, what we really mean is the ratio between nitrogen 15 and nitrogen 14. But we're interested in that nitrogen 15 value from that ratio.
Okay, and probably venturing into a very dangerous area for me. What's the difference between nitrogen 14 and 15, apart from the fact that there is one more proton? Like, what makes one important or unimportant?
Sure. Well, so nitrogen 15 is going to be much more scarce in the ecosystem. And so it's a little bit more useful to us because it's not as ever present in the same way that nitrogen 14 might be. With isotopes, you also have a difference between stable isotopes and radioactive isotopes. So for us, we use stable isotopes. They don't change over time. They just are what they are, more or less. Versus radioactive isotopes like carbon 14, for example, which does change over time. Exactly.
So,
again, I'm not a chemist. But
because I was going to say, what's the half-life of carbon 14, Jeff?
I should know that, but it's not a stable isotope, so it's not on my radar.
It doesn't matter. Okay. Now, the question that I sometimes get when I'm talking to people about, lots of the, people will say, it must be great talking to all these people about birds and bird research, but I often get asked, why do we have to know some of this stuff?
Sure.
Like, why was it important to unravel the mysteries of not so much what Tawaki eat, but where in the ocean they eat them, and not in a geographic sense, but in sense of the depth of the ocean? So why is that an important thing for researchers genuinely to understand?
Yeah, so understanding things like where the birds are foraging out at sea and where in the water column they're foraging at sea can be really important for conservation by protecting appropriate areas where they can actually go out and get the food that they need. But also in terms of understanding how they might interact with things like fisheries, for example. Around New Zealand, that's often a hot topic as how seabirds are going to interact with fisheries. And we know that some species of seabirds that forage, for example, benthic along the ocean floor might be more predisposed to getting caught in deep set nets, for example. Whereas birds that are foraging in the upper part of the water column might not encounter those same threats, or at least in the same proportion. So by building this picture of not only what types of prey are important, but where they get them, both geographically and within the water column, can really help for conservation measures and management of these species, so that we can kind of protect appropriate ranges for them to find their food, but also understand what sort of threats they might face while they're doing it.
So let's do a short rundown recap on the Tawaki Project.
Sure.
Generally, the Tawaki Project is an ongoing and collaborative research project into the Tawaki, the Fiordland Crested Penguin.
And more.
But let's start with the Tawaki.
Sure.
What are the main threats to Tawaki?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think, over the life of the project, those threats have either increased, decreased, or sort of maintained at a static level?
Sure. So Tawaki are really interesting penguins. So unlike most other species of penguins, especially in New Zealand, Tawaki are actually doing really well. That's one thing that we found over the last 10 years of the project, is that Tawaki seem to be kind of bucking the trend of a lot of other species. But that doesn't mean that they don't have any sort of threats. So for Tawaki, we know that they have some threats on land during the breeding season from introduced animals, particularly stoats, possums can sometimes be a problem as well as other rodents. So protecting breeding habitat is super important. Luckily for them, most of Tawaki's breeding range is within Fiordland, which is protected in Fiordland National Park. So ongoing trapping efforts to remove stoats and other invasive species is really important for maintaining Tawaki populations and their breeding habitat on land. Once they go out to sea, they can face all sorts of different threats. One that I kind of hinted to already is they do have the chance of becoming bycatch in fisheries. So things like set nets can and do catch Tawaki. So being able to inform fisheries where Tawaki are likely going to be foraging and when, and can help with reducing that risk for them. So that maybe we can help inform fisheries to set their nets in different areas or at different times, or otherwise come up with ways to mitigate that. But they also face a threat that many other species around the world are facing, and that is related to climate change and the effects that has on food availability. We know that changing ocean temperatures can really affect the productivity of a particular region. So we've seen in some years when sea surface temperatures are really high for extended periods of time, during these extended La Niñas that we've been having, it can be a little bit more difficult for penguins to get food. I think it was the Jackson Head colony back several years ago, excuse me, that was tracked going significantly farther to find food during those La Nina years than they would in other time periods where it had the previous years. But that's also not consistent. Each of these different marine events are unique. So it's not exactly a blanket picture there. But in general, global climate change and warming of the oceans does pose a threat to Tawaki and other penguins as well. And that's something that we need ongoing research to really figure out the best way to manage that for them.
So in your opinion, how do you think New Zealand is doing in terms of protecting Tawaki?
Sure. There's always room for improvement, for sure. I think that on land so far, it seems like at least within Fiordland, it's going pretty well. For the most part, there's trapping, there's efforts to be in protected areas. That's great. At sea is a little bit of a different story. We're still having Tawaki that are caught in nets. We're still having issues in some areas with fisheries and, for example, changes to the seafloor for things like oyster farming can also be an issue for Tawaki. So I think New Zealand has a ways to go as far as how they balance species conservation, especially marine conservation, with the needs and goals of fisheries. I think there's a lot of places to do way worse than New Zealand too. So I don't think that New Zealand is doing a good job, but it could do much better, I think.
I know that Forest and Bird are extremely concerned about the trajectory of New Zealand generally with the change of government. So it'll be interesting to see what the levels of support for. So these are very niche conservation efforts because most people are completely unaware of the lives of seabirds, which of course is why we like talking about them so much.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Tawaki is luckily they're doing pretty good for penguins. They're doing pretty good at the moment. But I think part of their success and also maybe a little bit of their detriment is they live in such a remote area. So they're very removed from the general public's mind. I think more so than things like Little Blues would be, or hoihos, for example. But I do think that things like the Tawaki Project, Thomas and Ursula have been doing a fantastic job spreading the word of Tawaki around. Recent things like on Netflix, Our Planet season 2 featured Tawaki. I think that was really good for getting their face out there. You probably can't see it, but now there's a beer that's being brewed in Massachusetts that has Tawaki as its a logo for the New Zealand Pale Ale. So Tawaki is
now. Let me stop you on that.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes I would say that's really great, but is that Memphis brewery sending something per unit sold to support the Tawaki Project?
So I don't know the specifics on that. They do. It's a brand new one. All right. It's Aquatic Brewing in Falmouth, Massachusetts. It's a new beer that they just put out this year. I know that they do have the Tawaki Project's logo and contact information on the cans. So at least people can get in touch with the Tawaki Project and reach like the Patreon, for example, via that. But I don't know if there's any funds at this point that are being funneled into the project.
Okay, I'm going to
maybe one day, hopefully.
I'm going to advance a controversial point of view.
Okay.
If they're not, they bloody well should be. Otherwise, it's just exploitation. Because why would a Memphis brewery want to put the Tawaki on their label? Why not some bloody thing from Tennessee? Why not Elvis? Right? Because you have to bloody pay for Elvis, right? No, well, that's probably it.
Sure.
They rather have Graceland, but if they do that, they've got to pay Graceland. So if you're exploiting an image, and this is what I see it as, you should be sending 5 cents a can or something sold to the Tawaki Project.
I mean,
there's your challenge, Aquatic Brewing.
Yeah.
And if you are already, I'm really sorry, and thank you so much. But my guess is you're bloody not, because you think advertising the Patreon is enough. You better be Patreons. You better be patrons.
I will just to put in, I did meet the owner a couple weeks ago, and he was fantastic. So I don't.
Oh, I'm sure he is. I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but I'm just. I'll look it up later. They better be patrons at the highest level. Well, no, I'm serious about that, because otherwise, that's exploiting something that they're a new. I mean, Tawaki is now kind of famous because of Netflix, right? So there's it's like the whole. I mean, you being in the States, it's a bit like stolen valor, right? Right?
I can see your point. They definitely, at least from what I have been told, all of their beers have some sort of marine conservation or marine focus, and the owner had done some, I think, geology work in New Zealand.
I'm going to approach them this afternoon.
Good.
For an interview, because if I'm totally uninformed, I'm just making an assumption, and if I'm wrong, I'm going to laud these guys.
Sure.
But this gets me a bit grumpy. We had it. I'll give you the example. Now, you haven't lived and worked in Australia, so you might not know this bird. But one of our iconic rare birds, endangered birds, is the orange-bellied parrot.
Okay.
Erigard. Now, Erigard is a commercial property of one of the largest companies in the world. Last year and the year before, they ran an ad about someone in the jungle on the search for the orange-bellied parrot.
Okay.
And you have to take your Erigard because you're going into the jungle. The orange-bellied parrot doesn't live in jungles.
Right.
And from what I could tell, and I reached out to the company and asked them, they didn't support the orange-bellied parrot at all.
Sure.
They're just borrowing on something that is always topical, and that you get it's greenwashing. You get a bit of kudos.
Sure.
So the uninformed people would think, isn't that great? Erigard are supporting the orange-bellied parrot. Bullshit, they were. They were exploiting something, and it's exactly stolen valor.
Right. No, I can see that. I would say I would I would hope that this brewery would in the future that if they aren't already, that's in their plans. After meeting the guy, I could definitely see them doing that.
What was it? Aquatic Brewery.
Aquatic Brewing, Falmouth, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Great beer. Can design is beautiful.
Aquatic Brewing in Falmouth, Massachusetts.
Yep.
On Cape Cod.
Yep.
Where the deprived and downtrodden.
But it's also where one of the top marine research institutes in the U.S. is. So there is a marine conservation connection for sure.
Okay, so there's nothing about that on their webpage. There is weekly events, parking, seating, etc. So I can do that. I can go to their events. I can get tickets. I can do all that. There is nothing about the Tawaki there.
It might not be on the website because when we went, they donated what they had left in stock to the Tawaki Project, the actual beers. So it might not be on the website anymore because it might be out of stock.
Okay, and just so people know I'm not being unfair. So here we are. That's their front room, their front page. And we can visit the tap room, and there's the weekly events and all of that stuff. Dog friendly by the look of it. Only friendly, well-behaved, quiet, on-leash dogs are allowed. Well, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
So that's that. Tap list and event. You can get tickets, draft lists. Actually, I'm just looking for Tawaki. I'm not seeing.
I think they take things off that aren't in stock at the moment.
Okay, and contact. So, all right, now, all right, okay. So we'll just take that off. So, well, I'm kind of happy that they're not promoting Tawaki on their website or anything.
No, and I would say they are very, very good. Definitely, I personally would support them. At least in having it.
Me too. I mean, but it comes back to that. That I mean, I often have this discussion in Australia about, we need more awareness. No bullshit. We need more action. We need more money. We need more action. We need more. We need more less clearing. Less destruction of habitat. I think the awareness train has already got to the end of the line and is on the way back. I'll just okay. So good. Well, I am really glad that in some parts of the world, Tawaki and other penguins. I mean, you mentioned hoi ho here in Australia, obviously, where we've got the little penguin or the fairy penguin.
Yep.
Or I'm not even sure which one we're supposed to call it. When I was a kid, it was the fairy penguin. But I think the fairy penguin is correctly applied to the New Zealand species, the New Zealand subspecies, because you've got two, haven't you?
There's two in New Zealand. In New Zealand, I only ever hear them called the little blue penguins, or more commonly korora, which is the te reo name.
Yeah, but I think you've got one subspecies that doesn't migrate into Australian waters and one that does, or that disperses. Migrate's probably the wrong word because they're on fishing expeditions.
Right.
And they're not. And I think that one is the fairy penguin.
Yeah, I've always heard fairy penguin associated with the ones that are the Australian group. I know in New Zealand, most of what you see in New Zealand is the New Zealand little blue penguin, the korora. Around Dunedin and the Otago Peninsula, Oamaru, that area, I believe that one is the Australian subspecies over there, which is interesting because it's the opposite side of the island. But yeah. And then there's the white flippers, of course, but they're a color morph.
Yeah, I can't remember. I know we spent too long talking about this with with Ursula, but
Uh,
I think for such a very well-known seabird
hmm
in the Australian sense,
hmm
it's still really not well understood
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in its particularly in all the cultural
hmm
senses.
Oh, for sure.
Very very important for tourism here. So
Well, of course.
of course, we love it for that.
Yep. Yeah, because you're
Okay,
in
let's
Dublin. You're near
beg your
Phillip
pardon.
Island. You're near Phillip
Yeah,
Island. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. So I mean, it's a rite of passage for virtually every foreign tourist who
hmm
comes to Melbourne. They need to take the bus trip down to the Penguin Parade,
Yep. Yep.
which is the nightly progression of the birds returning from feeding. And of course, the best time to do that is
At night.
in breeding season,
Yep.
when they are all coming back to
Yep.
either relieve partners in the nesting burrows or feed hungry chicks.
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
it's
actually,
real.
no, I was
I
gonna say
think that
actually next year, not next year, 2026, I think. The next International Penguin Conference will be held at Phillip Island.
and that's a fantastic facility now.
Yeah.
It it was pretty tough when I went there. You just parked in a car park and
Uh,
went down and sat in the cold, and now there's this great facility that's
really?
been built around there. Yeah, it was pretty rugged when I first went
Okay.
as a young kid.
Sure.
Uh, I I wondered, Jeff, how did you get from being let's go all the way back. Let's go
Okay.
all the way back.
All right.
Uh, you're in you're living in Miami now. That's right.
Not anymore. I recently moved, so I'm actually up in upstate New York now. Uh,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. So, um, in George Santos territory.
Well, I got out of the Ron DeSantis territory and into the
No,
other.
no, no, no. But
Yeah,
you went to crazy George Santos
exactly. I
territory.
went from crazy
Okay.
Ron DeSantis to George Santis. So
Very, very good. So did you grow up in Miami
no,
in Florida?
not at all.
Okay.
No, so I grew up hopping back and forth between Memphis, Tennessee, and my family's farm in North Mississippi. So I spent most of my time running around our family's farm in Mississippi as a kid, and then ended up going to doing my undergrad at a. Well, I started out at a university in Mississippi, Mississippi State. Thought I wanted to be a vet. Then quit that and waited a few years. Worked in vet med for a few years. And then finished up my undergrad outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And that's where I kind of changed my mind and decided I wanted to go into ecology.
Right. So the reason I was trying to track down your childhood roots was because I did notice that you had 11 years working as a vet tech.
Yep.
So, so what I wanted to get to, and I didn't realise that you grew up on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you were a kid, you're obviously into animals. You're on the farm. You've got an understanding about husbandry and animal welfare and whatnot. But were you a bird nerd and a wildlife kid?
Yes, very much so. I was very much the bird kid. It started out. Yeah, I had always loved wildlife, and wild birds were always interesting to me. But it really started out when I was, I think, 13, and my grandparents gave me my first pigeons, and so my obsession with birds started with raising pigeons, and from there it grew into having chickens and ducks and pheasants and emus and all sorts of other domestic livestock birds. I raised sheep for a long time and have been riding and showing horses for most of my life too. But that was really like the start of my bird obsession, was those first couple of pigeons that I got.
Now, so there's so many things I want to ask you about because one of the channels I watch on YouTube a lot is a girl and she's I think she's from Florida,
Okay.
but she says pigeons are better pets than parrots and
Yeah.
canaries and whatnot. But they have all the same uh, sort of. They fulfil all the same sort of emotional needs
Sure.
for people that really friendly parrots do.
Mhm.
So, is that your experience at your?
Well, I wouldn't say that any of my pigeons were quite that friendly as like a parrot would be,
It,
but
it is that because, and let me ask, because I'm really interested in the nature of birds.
yep.
Like, and people will say, what's this got to do with conservation? I think we place, I mean, we anthropomorphize animals, right,
Mhm.
all the time.
Yep.
And I think our experience of how we interact, and
Mhm.
when it comes to birds, it's how we use birds,
Yep.
birds that we're familiar with.
Hmm.
Um, we put a character onto them that they might not deserve. Like, did you hand raise your pigeons like someone would their little pet budgie or their pet conure, or did you have them in a loft and you let them out and they did the circling round and then they came back?
Right.
So they were essentially a semi-wild, domesticated
Yeah.
flock animal.
Yeah. My pigeon, for the most part, my pigeons were out they were in a loft, and that's what they
Yeah,
did.
yeah, yeah.
Obviously, we interacted, but not
Yeah,
in.
but they weren't hanging out in your bedroom while you were
No,
doing your homework.
no. There was occasional times where there would be a squab that got abandoned or whatever
Yeah.
reason, and I would hand raise, and those did end up being much friendlier, of course. More often than not, I would have. I mean, growing up, I always had like baby ducks or whatever it may be that were in the house because they were in a brooder or something. I almost always had well, not always. I had a lamb that stayed and lived in my room for a while. So there were animals that came in and out like that, but not the norm.
I had a pet lamb called
Yeah,
Daisy,
Daisy.
and Daisy came in the car with us and
Uh-huh.
went everywhere, and then we ate her.
Oh, well, no, mine. We never ate any of mine. My grandfather wanted. I had pigs too, or a pig.
Yeah.
He really wanted to raise pigs, but I couldn't do it.
But I mean, they didn't go off to live at someone else's farm. Did you ever
Mhm.
get told that story?
No,
Oh,
no,
no.
no.
They lived to a ripe old age and
Yep,
were able to wallow until death. Okay.
pretty much.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
no,
Okay.
that was especially with the pigeons and the other birds. That was a big part of my childhood, especially going through even middle and high school. I still had them when I started my undergrad, but once I moved away out of the state and was multiple hours away from home, it wasn't really sustainable anymore. I didn't want to just put all that on my parents. So at that point is when I sold most of what I had, and
So
now
you,
horses.
so you never had a budgie or a
I have had one parrot. I had a Pacific parrotlet, and her name was Yoshi. I had her for 12 years. She died earlier this year, but that's my only experience with raising a parrot. I worked with them a lot in clinics, and also somewhat at the zoo when I was at the Nashville Zoo, but otherwise not so much experience with parrots.
I wasn't going to do this, but Jeff, I have to because of
Okay,
where the conversation has gone.
sure.
Just bear with me just a minute, all right?
Okay,
All
okay,
right? Don't go anywhere.
all right. No, beautiful.
Yes. Be prepared for bedlam. mayhem. So
It's so pretty.
this is Loz,
Loz.
and because I've got the green screen, half of
Uh.
Loz keeps disappearing. That Loz is, of course, a rainbow lorikeet.
Yep.
Who turned up. Regular viewers of the show know that Loz turned up while we were live streaming on New Year's Eve.
Really?
Loz arrived on the windowsill, and I now know, I didn't know then, because I now know Loz a lot better, was in very poor condition.
Sure.
Obviously tame, but in very poor condition now that Loz is fattened up and livened up and a lot happier with me. Loz is my advisor now.
Well, it's a great advisor to have.
Yeah. So there we go. I just thought I'd let you in. I know. I had birds as a kid, and then I never wanted to have a captive bird ever again. I would never have gone and bought one, but I'm happy to rescue one.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and I'm kind of the same way right now with parrots. I had my parrotlet, and I went with her because they have a short lifespan. It wasn't a 40-year commitment, but yeah, I don't think I'd ever get another parrot unless it was something like it was a rescue situation.
Yeah, I never wanted to. I went to a market in Indonesia once, and I could not believe the kinds of birds that I was seeing in cages being offered as sale for pets, and it's seen the same sort of thing in Malaysia and the Philippines as well. So I never wanted, and of course there used to be an egg harvesting for hobby and for the pet trade here in Australia, and I never wanted to be part of that. But I think, thanks. Danger of having a lorikeet.
Oh, yep.
Because they're mostly liquid feeders, you have to be prepared to wash a lot of stuff and not be too worried about. Well, that's why I have a very old hat now, and I'm wearing it because it's a safeguarding mechanism. Now, we got totally off track, but I was interested to know about being on a farm in Mississippi, yeah?
Yep.
What were the birds that as a kid that you were seeing regularly and were really sort of attracted to? I'm assuming that you had red-winged blackbirds coming through.
We didn't. Yes, they come through. We never had them that often on our farm because the farm ponds and stuff didn't have the tall, like emergent vegetation that they like cattails and stuff. But our farm is surrounded by national forest. So it's a huge area of just forest all behind us. And there's a large lake up there that's like a beaver impoundment. And it's most likely that's where they would be. I haven't seen them up there, though, but it seems like a place they should be at least. As a kid, I think the most interesting birds to me that I can remember, first of all, you have to love turkeys. I love wild turkeys. They were everywhere. You always see turkeys, and I really like them. One of my favorites that I don't ever see or hear anymore at home were bobwhite quail. Just going outside, visiting my great-grandparents and stuff, hearing the quails calling. I remember that very vividly from being, when I was a kid, but we don't see them anymore, which is kind of sad, actually. We would get lots of ducks, especially in the wintertime. Being in the South, a lot of the ducks would come through in winter with us. So hooded mergansers, probably one of my favorites that we would see. Beautiful duck.
Are your grandparents still there?
My grandfather is still there, as is my mom and my younger brother.
Okay, so you're still. Oh, Loz got me a beauty there. So you're still at times heading back there, so you can monitor the changes. That you see yourself.
Yeah, so I've actually over the past probably decade or so, I've been keeping keeping lists of what I see every time I go back, and I go back different times a year. Usually it's in the winter for Christmas, but this past year I spent quite a bit of time in the spring and summer there as well. But I've been keeping a nice list of what I see every time. I try to make checklists every time I go and just keep a monitoring on it. We don't really raise anything crop-wise or livestock-wise. We still have horses, but they're also very elderly horses now. So one of my projects that I've been working on over the same decade or so is slowly trying to restore parts of the property and remove invasive species, plants especially, and replant natives that we've lost. So that's been kind of a long-term project that I've been working on back there.
So it's basically a property now that is being rested. Is that so? It's not being intensively farmed.
No.
But there must be hundreds of thousands of properties like that across America now that could be really, really valuable refuges and for remnant species too. Yep. I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like for us, our family's been there. I think I'm the fifth generation, and it's up until my great grandparents had passed. That entire time, it was either farmed with cattle or crops or whatever it may be, various sorts of things. But it has, like you said, it's been resting. Just a few horses on it now. And it's a huge difference. The forest, especially in the back parts of the property, and it goes back up into some decent hills across a very deep creek the horses can't cross. And that's definitely coming back really nicely. We see lots of things back there that I didn't see as a kid, bird-wise, and also, amphibians, seeing more salamanders and all sorts of things, mammals too. So yeah, no, those sorts of properties, especially in the South, there's a lot of places like that were farmed by grandparents or great grandparents, but then since then everybody has moved away to get to a state with maybe more opportunities, and so yeah, they just sort of sit there. And unfortunately, in the South, a lot of times that means it gets covered by invasive plants. Yeah. So
that's the tale for the whole of the world. Once land has been disturbed, it has to be maintained.
Yep, absolutely.
There we are. Thanks, Loz. Now, let's talk. Let's stay on your formative years for a little bit longer before we go into your current research, which of course is all about birds again, seabirds. You said you've been keeping lists. Mm-hmm. Are you adding those into eBird or somewhere so that they are adding to the overall knowledge of bird species and distribution?
Yep. Yeah. So I usually try to do at the very least a couple, like a Christmas bird count and other bird counts, if I can. When I'm there, I do submit to eBird. Otherwise, I do keep just like a life list of my own. That I actually have not put over into eBird yet, the full life list. That's on my to-do list. It's on my computer currently.
Do you know your number?
For total life list or for the property?
Well, both. Well, I'd be impressed just if you knew either one. But
total is, I think, 705 or something. And for the property, I have recorded, I think, a little over 100 species on the property itself.
Now I have to ask, because that 700 is bolstered by trips to New Zealand.
Of course. So, and New Zealand, Australia, South America.
Oh, okay. So, well, I'm getting less impressed by your number now, because if you've been to Australia and New Zealand, I have to ask, how extensive was your bird watching in New Zealand? I mean, that's my...
Sure.
I can't wait to get there and go and try and find some things.
To be honest, I have not had the chance to actually go on a birding trip in New Zealand. All of my species of New Zealand have come in some form via field work. whether it's driving to Milford Sound or going out to the subantarctic, that has definitely increased the numbers. I mean, if you think of New Zealand, in the grand scheme of things, there's not that many land bird species. So you can get those fairly quickly, but the seabirds.
But all of their birds, especially their endemic birds, are just amazing. But they're just crazy birds.
Yep. I saw for the first time 2 years ago, I think it was. We were in Dusky Sound doing some surveys for the Tawaki Project. And we ended up on some islands that had saddlebacks, which I'd never seen before, which was super cool to have saddlebacks around. We're able to yellow crown kakariki. I think it was an orange crown. I think maybe it's orange crown. I always get them confused which one is the super rare one and which one's the more common one.
I think the orange crown is the rarer than the yellow, right, isn't it? And I think right. And the red fronted is rarer again, I think. Is that right?
The I've seen the yellows in Fiordland. On Antipodes Island, was able to see the Antipodes parakeet, as well as the red crown species that's there as well, who I'm blanking on the name for right now. So those are the only parakeets I've seen there. But yeah, I mean, any native bird that you see in New Zealand is amazing. And if you see them multiple times, it's amazing the second and third time as well.
Yeah. I think, I mean, we're spoiled here in Australia with the variety of bird, not only species, but the representation of families. But then when you understand that maybe Australia is the birthplace of the passerines, or the passerines, that shouldn't be that surprising, I guess. Yeah. But careful, Loz.
Yeah, I feel like you can't go wrong at least coming from North America. You can't go wrong anywhere in Australia as far as seeing cool and also new birds. I spent most of the time that I spent in Australia has been in Queensland. This was on a vacation, but spent time up in the Daintree and then down into around Brisbane, and then some time around Sydney. But that's as far as I've made it in Australia so far. But even so, I think on that trip, I think I got 100 species, which I went in 2019 to scout for a project I was going to do in Papua New Guinea, and was super excited to go see the birds in Papua New Guinea. But I came back with, I think, it was less than 50. It was maybe like 35 or 40 species that I could actually identify, because I just didn't have a clue what I was looking at. And so I would just hear all these birds, but could never see them because the forest was so dense and I just couldn't find them. But I did see birds of paradise, which was in cassowaries.
So I'm really interested in the Papua New Guinea experience, because it's hard spotting birds in the rainforest. But are you, when you're bird watching it, are you taking a camera or are you a camera? I mean, a normal camera. I don't have a great lens, like a big zoom lens. But yes, I take a camera, and I obviously have my binoculars, which is really good. I do the same thing when I'm doing field work. So I have lots of great pictures of penguins from the subantarctic islands. I have horrible pictures of Tawaki because of them living in the rainforest. So hard. Taking pictures with my phone is about the best I can get most of the time for them. Speaking of phone, let's see. Can we see what Loz has just
of course.
Phone? Thank you, Loz. You have to be very, very dedicated and have a lot of cloth.
Yep.
To let your lorikeet roam around. So, is your bird? Where does your interest in bird watching take you? Does your interest in ecology and unraveling the mysteries of species
Mhm.
lead you into being a more avid bird watcher, or did your interest in birds and your interest in becoming a vet,
Mhm.
which you didn't follow on with,
Mhm.
has that led you more to be interested? Has your interest in science led you to be more interested in birds? Like, is it a chicken
Sure.
and egg thing?
I think, yeah, that's a hard one to kind of pinpoint. I've always liked birds, and I've always loved going to see birds and going out into wherever it may be to go into nature, right? I love going hiking. I love spending time just out in the forest. And I think that is really what started it for me, is just going out, spending time in the forest or wherever it may be, um, and enjoying just nature in general. I um, cannot go on a hiking trail without stopping to take pictures of a bunch of plants that I see or seeing some cool moss, right? And part of that is also listening and hearing the birds around, seeing, um, here in the U.S., seeing something like a ruffed grouse or a woodcock or something fly out in front of you. Those things really got me interested in paying attention more to the birds that were around me. And then as I went through undergrad, and especially once I got to grad school, um, and there was that science aspect to it as well. I think that really did fuel it even more, because now I know more about, why birds are in a particular location, and what birds, being in there might mean for the health of that ecosystem, and what birds not being there might mean. And so I think it kind of just all builds on itself. There's still that joy of just being outside, and seeing what you see, combined with this ever-growing knowledge and desire to learn more about wherever I happen to be. Kind of all built on each other, I think.
So, your PhD, you gained working on the Tawaki Project
Yep.
through the University of Miami, University of Florida at Miami. That's
No,
right.
University of Miami. Yeah.
University of Miami.
That'll make people in Miami mad if it's University of Florida.
Yeah, yeah. But now you're
Mhm.
doing your postdoctoral work.
Yep.
You're at Cornell, right? The Cornell lab.
So I'm at, interesting full circle. I'm actually officially at the Cornell College of Veterinary Medicine, interestingly enough, but I work kind of jointly with the Lab of Ornithology right now. Just started last month. So we're working on developing these projects, both with the Tawaki Project and continuing to work in New Zealand, but also working, collaborating with a project that is ongoing in the Falkland Islands, working with some seabirds there as well. And I will say,
and that's the double-crested shag, right?
no, so that was actually my PhD. So my PhD was mostly on Tawaki.
Okay.
But I am a product of grad school PhD during COVID. So I started my PhD in 2019. I also did my master's working with the Tawaki Project as well before that. And my PhD was supposed to be primarily working in Papua New Guinea on high altitude birds. That was going to be the primary focus. The lab that I was in mostly worked on high altitude species. But when I came to that lab at University of Miami, I proposed to my advisor that I would definitely want to do that, but I don't want to give up the penguins. So he allowed me to keep that on as a side project at the time. So 2020 came around, the next semester, and all of my field plans for Papua New Guinea that summer were obviously canceled, right? It then became apparent that renewing my research permits and visas for Papua New Guinea was not going to happen on the time frame that I needed to be able to complete the PhD. So I had to pivot, and so the Tawaki became the main focus of my PhD, which is fine with me. And so in planning for that, again, New Zealand's borders were closed still. So I still couldn't go there, but we're getting everything ready to go once I could. But I also just couldn't sit there and do nothing. So I came up with a local project to do in Florida that still fit into the broader scope of the lab I was in. And that ended up being the Double-crested Cormorant and Hinga project that I did. Okay. So all over the place.
Now, listeners, my confusion is because I was checking out Jeff's LinkedIn page, and I really love this sentence in your LinkedIn profile. Currently, I am working on projects across a wide range of species and ecosystems.
Yep.
That is the most generalist take
yep.
I think I've ever read from a scientist's
yep.
LinkedIn.
I mean, that's the thing is at this stage, yeah, I have finishing up the project in Florida with the cormorant and anhingas. I have Tawaki. I have the red-crested penguins and rockhoppers in the sub-Antarctic. And now we're moving into brown skuas, striated caracaras, and snowy sheathbills in the Falklands. So it's a wide range of species and ecosystems, I suppose.
All right. Well, let's summarize the double-crested cormorants, sure. or shags.
Yep.
And the Ahinga project.
Yep.
What were you aiming to discover? What did you discover?
Sure. So double-crested cormorants and anhingas are both relatively closely related to each other. And they're both diving birds that live in very similar ecosystems in the southern U.S. They both live in coastal marine habitats, less so with the anhingas, but they do utilize it, and also in a lot of freshwater lakes and in the Everglades in Florida. What I wanted to do is understand what sort of physiological adaptations these two birds have in terms of oxygen conservation to allow them to dive more effectively. We know a lot about things like oxygen storage in the blood, in the muscles, and various other physiological changes in other diving species, like penguins. We know quite a bit about in some species. We know a lot about this in marine mammals. And my lab mate at University of Miami did a really big project and a really nice project comparing all of the diving ducks of North America in these same aspects. But the cormorants and the anhingas are this one whole representative of this whole family of diving birds that we really don't know anything about in terms of their physiology. So for that project, I wanted to see what we could find out about these birds, and particularly the anhinga, because anhingas, which you have darters in Australia, and you would know they're super unique birds. They don't dive like any other sort of diving bird. They're just sort of sink into the water. They're very, very passive, very weird birds. And I wanted to know if that weird, passive, different, I guess I should say not weird, lifestyle that they have as compared to...
We don't know that they're Republicans, so please off on the weird talk.
Yeah. I wanted to know if that had any physiological ramifications for their diving behavior. And it turns out it does. So what I found out is that cormorants, double-crested cormorants, behave more like you would expect from a diving animal. They store a lot of oxygen in their muscles. They can store some in their blood, although not as much as I expected. And they have other modifications at various steps along the way to allow them to more effectively utilize oxygen to fuel their body while they're underwater. Right? You're underwater, you can't breathe, you got to work with what you got. And hingas they just don't seem to care about oxygen in the same way. Instead, anhingas seem like they just are fine with the little bit of oxygen that they have. They don't really have elevated stores compared to most other diving birds. In fact, in most parameters, they look physiologically like a dabbling duck. They look like a mallard. So what we have decided, or at least what we want to test next, is they have a very, very slow metabolism. And I think that really slow metabolism means they don't have a lot of need or as high of a demand for oxygen as something like a cormorant would have. And so they're able to dive in this very passive way, conserving the little bit of oxygen that they have. So they don't really have any need to evolve these modifications to these various systems to store more oxygen, like most divers do. So yeah, that has implications for their foraging. They forage in very different ways. That then will expose them to different types of prey. Cormorants are typically hunting in deeper water systems, more open water, whereas anhingas like to be in the shallows, kind of ambushing prey in vegetation. And all of this kind of boils down to that underlying metabolism, physiology as well. So anhingas are one of those species that I did not know how much we don't know about anhingas until I started this. There's just nothing about them. There's maybe, I think, there's less than 5, I believe, published papers on anhingas, and then a few more on the other darter species. So anything we can learn about them is something. It's important, I think.
Yeah, I did look for works on. Well, have I got it wrong? I've always called them ahinga, but is it anhinga?
Yeah, anhinga.
And even on cormorants, there's not a lot known about cormorants and shags.
Yeah,
and but there's a lot assumed, isn't there? There's an awful lot of assumed knowledge.
There is
especially about what they eat.
Yep.
And so probably very. I mean, anhinga is such a global species that there's probably a lot to learn that can be applied worldwide. So
I agree.
I hope you get a chance to really follow that up. But I can't let you go without talking about the Fiordland Project.
Sure.
Because, I mean, skewers are pretty cool.
Oh, they are.
In a bombastic, bullying kind of way.
Sure.
But I think when you throw the sheathbill into the mix, that people are going to go, oh, my goodness. Now, I've seen plenty of video of skewers opening eggs using tools, using stones and pebbles. Does sheathbill do the same thing, to your knowledge?
I don't actually know. I haven't come across that information when I've been reading about them, but I mean, I don't know enough to say that they don't, but I'm not sure. I mean, they are. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, but also skuas are pretty smart birds. So,
well, that was where I was going. I was wondering whether, if you've got a population of like southern brown skua that are using rocks, because I'm not sure if the Pomerines or others are using rocks and pebbles to open eggs as well, crack eggs.
Sure.
I wonder if sheathbill can learn by observing. Or,
maybe.
But in a nutshell, what's this project going to be about? And also tell everyone what you know about sheathbills.
Well, we'll start with the sheathbills. Not a whole lot. Not much yet. So the Falkland Islands project is actually a project that I was brought into for this postdoc. So the lab that I'm in, Amandine Gamble's lab, she mostly is looking at pathogen spread. So what my role is in this whole Falkland Islands project is using stable isotopes and using GLS and GPS tracking of the skuas, caracaras, sheathbills, the avian predators for these islands, is understanding and recreating or reconstructing the food web. So are these avian predators preferencing eating seabirds? How much of their diet and time is spent consuming non-native mammals in particular, like rats, mice, even sheep, eating from carcasses.
Carrion, yeah.
Exactly. And how much does that translate then into exposure risk for pathogens, particularly things like HPAI and others? So the project at large is understanding these connections between native birds, the predators, seabirds, and introduced mammals, and what that means for disease spread in these islands.
Is there a lot known about any of these corollary situations? I'm wondering. I'm wondering about. I mean, the Falklands being not intensively farmed,
Sure,
widely farmed.
Yep.
Compared to populations of the same species on uninhabited
Sure.
or almost uninhabited
Yep.
places of the earth. So have you got like a baseline to compare the Falklands against? That's, I guess, what I'm asking.
You can actually do that exact experiment in the Falkland Islands themselves, which is kind of the good thing about the Falklands, because there are those islands that are very heavily farmed and populated. But then as you get out into, especially like the western side of the island, there's lots of places that are not inhabited at all by people or livestock, and either have had rodents removed or never present. So part of the project is actually looking at that within the Falkland system. But we're also gathering information for the collaborators from islands across the Southern Ocean. So there's work happening in the French subantarctic islands. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring this over into New Zealand as well to really test that between those islands that have no human impact versus the ones that do, and what that means, especially for disease spread.
And the French territory, is that Kerguelen that you?
Yeah, in Amsterdam. Yeah. I think Amsterdam it either was starting this year or it's starting next year. They're doing a big eradication of rodents. So that they have, the people that we work with have a bunch of data from those islands when the rodents were present. And then the goal will be to then repeat that after the rodents have been eradicated, and also during the process. And that would be a good thing with the New Zealand islands as well, because you do have some islands like Antipodes, for example, that have already had the mice removed, or the $1 Million Mouse Project, that provide a good example of what the ecosystem looks like after rodent removal, compared to other islands like in the Auckland Island group that still have some of the invasive species left.
And increasingly there's data coming in that you'd be able to access too, I imagine, from Macquarie.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, there's been some amazing predator eradication projects. So, wow. I mean, it's almost too big to consider, isn't it? I mean, the scale of the environmental repair that needs to be done to assist just a handful of species.
Right.
And when you look at seabirds overall, it's such a massive task.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing with seabirds in particular is, there's these big projects to remove these non-native mammals, and that's crucial for breeding and for safeguarding those habitats for them. But another consideration with that is also there are species within those systems that have some sort of reliance on those non-native species as well. And that's part of what we're looking at for the Falklands, because skuas, caracaras, we don't know how much they're actually foraging on mice and other things that are being eradicated. And there's risk for them involved in secondary poisoning that needs to be considered. Not saying that eradication should not be undertaken, because it definitely should, but there's a bit of a more complex issue there for some of these islands.
Well, that's right. I mean, what is the baseline population level? You know, are skewers overpopulated
Right.
because of these rodents that
Yeah.
have been introduced, and that they're supporting a unnaturally high
Sure.
population level, while at the same time continuing to drive down the
Mm-hmm.
normal prey species population numbers. So
Yeah, and that's why it's important to sort of figure that those relationships out, right? So hopefully throughout this project, we'll have a better answer about that in the future, hopefully, because for some of the islands, we know that there aren't and never have been rodents present, right? So the skuas there, assuming they're foraging primarily on that island, should be a good representation of what those sorts of natural communities could look like. But we don't know if that's actually what they're doing. It's very possible they're traveling around to other islands as well. So that's where the tracking and stuff really is going to come in, to understand that spatial aspect too.
And what are the tracking methods that are going to be used? Like, are they harnesses? Are they flags on leg flags? Or what?
So the skuas that are in the cars, everything that's being studied, they first of all, they have leg bands on for identification. But we'll also be putting on leg bands, particularly on the skuas, that have GLS tags.
So with the flag on them. Is that the...
What do you... like an antenna? Or?
Yeah, like those little flags that I've seen on the waders that have that have a locating function.
No, it doesn't have. These don't have like a long flag or antenna or anything on them. Yeah. They're just a small little box that sits on the leg.
Yeah. I think we're talking about the same thing. We call them not like a big flag, just like they're color coded, they're visible, but it's not like a leg ring. They actually do transmit data that is that can be picked up. I think, is it intermittent or is it constant?
So for the GLS ones, they actually aren't sending the data back to...
Okay, you've got to collect them, do you?
We have to collect them, yeah.
Okay.
Now, if there's a satellite tag, things like that, yes, they definitely are. But for these, you have to get them back. We've used them on the Tawaki as well in the past. And they work really well if you get them back.
Oh, there we go. Well, we could have just said they're the same ones that that Ursula's been using.
Yeah, exactly. The same one.
Super costly. So
no.
You do want to... No?
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not so much. I just priced out a bunch of them the other day. They were around 100 to 200 pounds because of the British company each. So not too bad for these.
Still pretty pricey. We're still looking at $400 to $500 Australian, probably.
It was like 300 US or something for them. And they, but in the scheme of things, when you look at things like satellite tags, that we put satellite tags out on ducks in Peru a couple years ago, and my lab did, not me personally. And those were 4,000 or 5,000 for some of those tags. So that's very cheap comparatively, but still not an insignificant amount of money.
You might be able to reach out to Aquatic Brewery to
there you go.
to sponsor a couple of tags.
There you go. Full circle.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, we're getting towards the end, Jeff. So when I get a first time guest on the show, I need to find out a couple of things about their bird nerdery.
Okay.
Now we already know that you're a lister.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you've given us the numbers. So on the bird nerd spectrum, you're sounding like you're pretty far up one end of the spectrum there.
Okay.
Because you've got your home list, you've got
Yep.
your Australian list, you've got your New Zealand list,
Yep.
you've got your all-time list.
Yep.
What other lists are you keeping? Do you keep a list every time you go somewhere?
If I'm going on a trip, someplace I haven't been before, especially if it's overseas, I definitely keep a list of what I'm seeing that year or in that trip. For New Zealand, I make a new one every year I go. There's a new one for every field season. Everywhere that I've moved throughout undergrad and college.
House list.
Yep. Yeah, my house list for New York is at, I think, 40 already, and I've been here a month, so that's good.
Okay, what's the best bird on your house list? Actually, how far upstate are you in New York?
Yeah, so where I live in Ithaca is about 4 hours from New York City, and about also 4 hours down from Toronto. So we're kind of middle ways between those two. Almost to Niagara Falls in the Great Lakes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cold winters. So that's...
Supposedly so. Yeah, I haven't been here for one yet, but I won't be this year either because of field work. I'll be in the field. I'll be in the field from October 1st through March 14th. So I'll miss all of it.
So for our Spanish speakers, you'll be in the Malvinas.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Islas Malvinas.
Yeah, very good. I thought long and hard about whether I should even say that. It's still a very, very, very touchy subject for some parts of the world.
Yep.
Now, when you're traveling, are you constantly on the lookout? Are you subconsciously listing every kilometre you travel in a car or a bus or a train?
I have definitely been told that I very quickly pick up on birds as I'm driving, and probably should pay attention to the road a little bit more. So yeah, I definitely would notice if I see a cool bird as I'm driving, or even sometimes when I would drive home from Miami to Mississippi, which is about a 15-hour drive, just to pass the time. I'm constantly counting how many, especially anhingas and cormorants, that I would see along the ride. But yeah, I definitely do.
I mean, when you're a genuine bird nerd, I think when you're traveling, there are two states of being, and that's birding and asleep.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
I mean, even if I'm out on any kind of social interaction, if there's sparrows on the pavement or anything, I'm birding. I'm checking them out. I'm going, is there a tree sparrow in there?
Right. Right.
You
never know.
I don't think if you're a birder, you ever turn it off, do you?
No. No.
I mean, if you do, I don't think you're a birder. I think then you are either a photographer or a writer or something else. You're not a birder if you can turn it off.
I mean, that's the best thing to me is even if I leave the camera at home, which I do a lot, is just being able to go out for a walk or whatever it may be and just experience whatever birds or wildlife that you're seeing, and just having that in my head of what I saw on that on that walk today or whatever it may be is that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lister, but I can't turn the sort of immersive experiential birding off.
Yep.
Even when I'm at the supermarket, I'm watching what the sparrows or the crow or the ravens are doing in the rubbish bins.
Right.
And I just and you go, oh, geez, have I been here for 45 minutes?
Yep. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, crazy. Where is your favourite place that you like to go birding? And this isn't your wish list question. This is like, of the places that you do or have been birding, where's your favourite place?
I guess there's two answers to that for me. My favorite place in terms of the number / variety of birds that I could see while doing a walk or a hike or whatever it may be, definitely would be some of the wetlands in Florida. There was one, it's an urban wetland, but called Wakota and amazing for wading birds. Very, very close up views in the cypress trees of a lot of nesting species. It's like wood storks, spoonbills, all sorts of cool things there. But also it's where I saw my first least bittern and these other birds that like you just don't see unless you go repeatedly to some of these sorts of places. So that's a really good one for me. Just those wetlands in South Florida, because you never know what you're going to get. So that's one of my favorites. The other one for me, and this is more of an all-encompassing favorite type of experience, not just specifically the birds, but is birding in the Appalachian Mountains, particularly in West Virginia. I did my master's in West Virginia and did a lot of hikes and birding trips up into the high Appalachians there. And you go through so many different types of forest ecosystem. You get out into these high elevation bogs and glades, and you see so many just cool species and cool habitats getting up into these different forests and biomes and wetlands. So I think that's probably my favorite place for just an all around birding hiking experience is definitely in West Virginia.
And what I didn't see the Appalachian stuff in your in what were you working on the in the Appalachian?
Yeah, so I wasn't actually working on anything in the Appalachians. My master's university was there in West Virginia. So all of those hikes in the Appalachians were just recreational.
Okay.
Would love to work on stuff there, but never did.
I wanted to make a redneck joke, but I couldn't fit birding into it at all. So
it's just redneck phalaropes, I guess.
They're crazy birds when they're displaying, aren't they? Like just wacko. We don't get them doing their displaying when they're in this part of the world. So
I got to see phalaropes in Alaska. I was helping my lab mate do her field work, and we would go from Fairbanks up to the Arctic coast. Another amazing place for birds, because we never knew what we were going to see on the tundra up there. But phalaropes, we saw up there for the first time.
So, what's the best bird that you have seen?
I mean, it has to be the Tawaki. I mean, but apart from Tawaki or other penguins, because the red-crested penguins are pretty good too. Best bird. I really enjoyed seeing Ragiana bird of paradise in New Guinea. That was probably the highlight. That and the and palm cockatoos in New Guinea were the highlight of that trip, and are still really far up there of coolest birds I've seen.
Were the Ragiana bird of paradise displaying?
No, unfortunately, there was a male calling up, and we were hiking over a mountain. It was super early in the morning. There was one calling, and it was just close enough for me to see him, but it was not actually displaying.
Now, when I was a kid, I think it was called the Count Ragiana.
Oh, okay.
Bird of paradise. I wonder if they've changed that, because that gives you the opportunity. No, that gives you the opportunity to ask you, because this is a very controversial subject, apparently, Jeff. Bird names for birds, is that what we should be talking about, or are you quite happy with the Ragiana or Count Ragiana bird of paradise?
I don't know that I have much of a comment for birds outside of North America in that respect. But within North American birds especially, I think that we definitely should not be maintaining some of these names that we've given some of these birds. I definitely think that bird names are better.
But that's an interesting take, isn't it? Why would it be different for North America than anywhere else?
I don't think that it actually is that different, but I don't think that I'm qualified. Really, I don't really have a stake in it outside of the U.S.
But the principle's the same, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
there's some.
mean, if you don't want something to be known as the horrid slave master flycatcher,
Yep.
that shouldn't be that should be the same, whether it's the I own a slave transporting company bitten or
No, I very much think that it's a good movement. I know it is very controversial. It's been a big thing here, especially.
yeah, it's starting to creep in here.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's occasionally will crop up in the media here,
Mm-hmm.
and you get the same bloody psychopath culture warriors who deny anything has ever been bad
Yeah.
at any time in white civilization,
Yeah.
lining up straight away on the no, we must keep inappropriate bird names, and I'm thinking, well, hang on, why are you happy to call an emu an emu?
Right.
Why don't you put some inappropriate name on a galah then? And they sort of think, well, no, I don't know. It just seems illogical to me. If you're going to adopt the principle that there are inappropriate names for birds that are generally attached to people, then we should find appropriate names for all birds.
No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think it, especially here, it definitely became this controversy between history, and remembering versus, we don't actually, maybe it was some historical person, but what does that mean to this bird? It means absolutely nothing. And if it actually is actively making other people feel uncomfortable and like birding is some, I don't know, some issue has issues with them because they're keeping up these names, it's so easy just to change it. Like, I don't see why it's not a hill we're dying on for sure.
No, and people seem to not understand that the scientific name or the proper name, that's not what we're talking about, because there is already a codified way of doing it. And that they do get changed sometimes, but in general there is a reason for why that name is applied. But for a common name, where that name is not even the same, it's not consistent across, not only across the world, but across countries or even across states, right? That people can be talking about the same. You could get 5 people from 5 different locations in the US, and they would all apply a different common name to the same bird. It's nutso.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's like that's I guess the hard part about it is there is the effort to have some sort of standard name, right? People are always going to call it whatever they're going to call it in their local area, regardless of what you have as the official name. But since there is a precedent and there is a naming committee and there is, or whatever it is that names them, it's a perfect opportunity to make it a name that's at least descriptive of the bird. If you're learning birds and you have, I don't know why this is the one that popped in my head, but you have Hammond's flycatcher. I have no idea who Hammond was, nothing about the person, but that doesn't tell you anything about the flycatcher, so having some sort of description is helpful for learning, I think, at the very least.
Well, I can imagine a little kid going, "Mom, what color is Hammond?"
Right, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, this bird, rainbow lorikeet, is a fairly good name for this bird. But then again, people say, "What's a lorikeet?" And
Sure.
I often don't know how to explain that, other than they're a family of nectar and fruit-eating parrots.
I mean, and that's where I think I really appreciate in New Zealand how like Tawaki and so many of the birds in New Zealand go by their te reo names as their common name now. Because often those have some sort of description of the bird or some sort of context to the bird, at least beyond just some guy. So I think that would be hard as a unifying one in places like, the US, just because there would be so many different native names for species, but still you could do that.
That issue crops up here too, because I've often, because so little is known across the continent here for what indigenous names of birds were. I've often asked this question and generally don't get an answer, but emu, it's a bird that's found across the whole country, but is it an emu in the northwest and the southwest and the southeast? Are there different names that are applied? And are we as white fellas appropriating names that we should not be saying? There's a whole lot of issues, but if we approach them in good faith, I think there's easy to get over those issues. I think they're less problematic than honouring people who have driven massacres of indigenous people.
Yep. Yeah, that's one thing I tried really hard with the Anhinga and Cormorant project, because I really wanted to know, try and find out at least for South Florida, what were some of the local indigenous names for those birds. Because Anhinga itself, I think, is an indigenous word from Brazil, I believe.
Yeah, I think,
or at least some.
It might be from somewhere like Guyana, I think.
Yeah,
but,
what were they actually called in North America? What were they called in Florida? But yeah, I don't know.
Well, someone was telling me that Ahinga, which is how I've been pronouncing it, was a name applied to the bird from the Indian subcontinent.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
But I couldn't find anything historical notes to back that up. So,
interesting.
Yeah. Anhinga sounds far more like a South American derived name, but I totally don't know, and I'm happy to be corrected.
No,
I just know that it's a really cool bird with a long neck and a long bill, and it hangs its wings out after it's been diving for food.
They're such cool birds. Penguins are still the top for me, but the cormorants and the anhingas they're pretty far up there. They're really cool birds that really deserve a lot more appreciation than they currently have, I think.
All right, 2 more questions. Where's your bucket list location to go bird watching? And I'm happy for you to say I want to go back to New Guinea and finish that trip. But is there a sort of location that you go to bed dreaming about in the same way that I used to dream about seeing a night parrot?
Have you seen one?
No.
Oh,
and I haven't. And I've been in a few places where it might be night parrot habitat, but no, I've got to get a lot further afield, and I have to chase up someone like Neil Hamilton and go out with them on one of their night parrot expeditions and try and find one. But I used to dream about seeing a night parrot when I was a kid.
That's
when we thought they were extinct.
Yeah. Jeez. Going back to New Guinea would be amazing for sure. I've never been to anywhere in Africa before, but going birding in South Africa, I think would be pretty far up there for me.
Any part of Africa.
Any part of Africa, for sure.
Imagine birding in the Congo or in the highlands of Rwanda.
But South Africa has African penguins and has, so that would be a place for me to start. But yeah, anywhere in Africa would be amazing. Another place that I would love to go is to go to Mongolia or Tibet. And some of the birds there would be so cool to me. Seeing like bar-headed geese, swan geese, All that would be that's way up there. One of my lab mate, the one that I went to Alaska with, after she finished her PhD, she went with a group of friends to Mongolia, and it was the end of winter, so it was still pretty cold there. But even then, she saw so many cool birds. I was super jealous. So that's definitely up there.
Just off topic for a minute. Well, on Mongolia,
Mm.
have you seen that fantastic film about you know how eagle, like eagling, it's like
Mhm.
falconry, but eagling is a pastime in Mongolia. Have
Yep.
you seen the one about the first girl who
Oh,
won the? Oh, amazing! I can't remember what it's called. I'll look it up
okay.
and send it to you.
Yeah. No, that'd be.
And it's a
Huh.
it's an amazing film from a cultural sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure that'd be cool. I'd like to see it.
before I ask you the last question I've got for you, Jeff, you notice that we have both done something that I've kind of been railing against
Okay.
today. Um, we have been talking about New Guinea. It is, of course, Papua
Yep.
New Guinea,
Yep.
but we've left off the significant indigenous portion of the name because it's easier.
Yeah.
But but we've done that without even knowing that we
Yeah.
have done
That's
that.
true.
So I'm very sorry about that for those of you
That's true.
who might be watching the show at some time from PNG. And you have amazing birds.
Oh, absolutely. And
PNG.
it's just an amazing country and amazing people.
Yeah. So Jeff, it might be obvious I've left out one of the questions too, but we'll get to that after this. What's your bucket list bird?
Ooh, bucket list bird. Well, I very much want to see all of the penguins. That's not one bird, I suppose. One, I think, honestly, one of the bird that I most want to see currently is I really want to see Stellar Sea Eagle.
Oh yeah.
It is. There's been one that's been just wandering around eastern Canada and northeastern U.S. for a
Yeah, it's
couple of
been
years.
popping up on Facebook and
Right,
Instagram a lot, hasn't it? Yeah.
and it's when I was in Alaska with my lab mate a couple years ago. There was one there. There was one, I think, around Denali National Park, and we of course didn't see it. So that is seeing a Stellar Sea Eagle would be just amazing. Whether it's in a vagrant or actually going to like Kamchatka or something or Japan would be really cool.
And of course, isn't it interesting? We've been talking about bird names for birds,
And Speller.
and we've got Stella's sea eagle. And
Yep.
I'm just going to look up. I will do it on Wikipedia because I don't know who it's named after.
There's a lot of things. He was a Russian explorer or Russian. Was he employed by Peter the Great maybe to explore?
Is named after German naturalist
German.
George Wilhelm Steller,
Mm-hmm.
who, if I follow him, German-born naturalist and explorer who contributed to the fields of biology, zoology, and ethnography. Oh, that sounds dodgy. He participated in the Great Northern Expedition 1733-1743, and his observations of the natural world helped the exploration and the documentation of flora and fauna of the North Pacific region.
Mm-hmm.
And then he joined the Russian Academy of Sciences
After
as
that.
a physician. So
Interesting. Okay.
so there we go. But I'm not sure whether we haven't read enough about him to find out whether we actually like him or not.
Who knows? I know. He has several things named after him.
When someone is interested in ethnography,
Uh-huh.
I'm very worried about whether he was measuring the size of people's skulls.
Yep.
So yeah, that's. But there we go. Perfect example of what we were talking about.
Yep.
the question I left out
Mhm.
might be a bit difficult because you've been working in so many areas.
Sure.
Because I usually ask people, what's your field guide of choice?
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to ask you is, what is your North American field guide of choice?
Sure.
What is your field guide for New Zealand?
Mm-hmm.
And what will you be relying on in the Falklands?
Sure. I'm not going to have a great answer because I don't know authors of field guides usually. For North America, though, it's Sibley. I have my, yeah. I always use my Sibley. I have many, but Sibley is my go-to in the U.S. In New Zealand, there's a couple of good ones. Again, I don't remember the names of the authors for them though. But honestly, for the most part, in New Zealand and also in the Falklands, I mostly now just use the Merlin to keep track of things, and it's just so much simpler.
So Merlin, not eBird.
Not eBird. No, I would say that I spend way more time on Merlin, trying to figure out what I'm looking at than I do eBird. And if I can't figure it out from there, then I'll try. But I feel like Merlin to me has a little bit of an easier interface to just quickly look for something. And especially in the field, I will download it before I go out, and yeah, then I have it rather than carrying a guide with me.
And of course, thinking about your field work and what might happen, I was just wondering, not for your specific project, maybe this might, if you eventually get back to Papua New Guinea, how much do you think research into birds is going to move towards the soundscapes, the analysing audio data more than visual recordings?
Sure.
How do you think we're moving towards a shift in the way that research will be done?
I mean, I feel like there's always going to be value in actually doing like the visual research and the surveys and things in that sort of method, right? But doing those soundscapes and having those recorders out in the rainforest or wherever it may be, you have the chance of recording so many more things than I think you're likely to see in the same time frame. So I think especially in remote places, in heavily forested areas in particular, that's going to become a really powerful tool. The trouble with that is then having the either the expertise in the person analyzing it or training data for like the AI or whatever else is using to actually identify the birds, or whatever else it is that you're recording, frogs or mammals maybe. But I think there's definitely a huge need for that, for getting out there and recording those various calls for all these different species so that you can then train the AIs in the future to be able to do that, or at least make a first pass through filtering it.
It seems that the AI, the analytical tools and the accuracy will obviously only increase. I would think.
Yeah.
So having that data of observation, even that data bank of observations, even if it has not been analysed, is going to be extremely valuable because that's background information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, and baseline information that any visual research or visual observations can be then applied over that can probably give you far more reliable information about trends. So
I mean, and that's the thing. There's no the trend the in science in general, right? There's not one method, right? We need all of these methods working together to be able to actually paint the full picture and get as much information as we can. So that's just one more growing tool that we could use to really do a better job of doing those explorations and getting those baseline data, like you were saying. Even just having the recordings and then we could do it again in a number of years and compare the two. We could see the changes just from listening to those recordings. So super important. Hopefully, is going to be getting more common as well. I know it's a big push here at Cornell, getting those soundscape projects going.
I'm just thinking about what those contrarians that we were talking about earlier on might be saying now. They might be about to write a column saying scientific research has lost all its validity since we stopped shooting all of our specimens. If you don't shoot it and send it to someone working out of the Royal Society in London, you really have not done any research at all. So,
I mean, there's a lot of research that can be done from collected birds, but I think that 9 times out of 10, it's not the case or not necessary.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're not going to go to Papua New Guinea and shoot 100 Count Ragiana birds of paradise.
No.
To determine some kind of baseline population.
No, not so much.
That's good to know. Jeff, it's been great to meet you. What does the next 6 months entail for you? Like, where is your next step for your research?
Pretty busy, actually. So I will be spending October through late December in New Zealand. We'll be going to the Bounty and Antipodes Islands, working with the erect crested penguins and the eastern rockhoppers. So continuing that project. Then I am back home for about 4 or 5 days, and then I fly to the Falklands. I'm in there till March.
Sorry for asking questions all the time.
That's what I hear for.
But I'm just thinking about handling those erect-crested penguins and rockhopper penguins. Yep. How often do you get regurgitated penguin lunch on you? And is that what the 4 or 5 days coming home is for, to wash off your stinky regurgitated penguin food clothes?
Well, it's not the regurgitation. I don't get that very often from them. It's the other end.
It's the squirties.
Yep. The penguins in general. That is it's a hazard of the job. Yep. That's what I look like
again.
Yep. And you get very used to being covered in that in the field and smelling like that. I actually, no matter how much you clean it, it's going to smell regardless. So you just have to get used to the fact that it's never going to go away. Those are your field clothes, and that's what they're always going to be.
And I'll give you a tip. If you would like a rainbow lorikeet as a pet, and you would like it to be as friendly as Oz is, get used to
that.
To this, wear your old hoodies when the bird is out, and it's very easy to clean up and no lasting effects. Not stinky, just annoyingly wet. So,
the penguins have the stinky, wet, lots of it. But it's worth it though. It's worth it.
Now, Jeff, we do have people watching on all of the platforms, and thank you, Cami and Naomi, for the Facebook thumbs up and the Facebook love. If you have a question for Jeff, you've got a minute or two that you can pop them in the comments. I'll also look and see if anyone's from nice visitors into Instagram today. If you've got a question, pop one in. It can be about seabirds or anything else about North American birds, or you can ask me about lorikeet poo. We'll entertain any of those subjects. Jeff, tell me something, just generally off topic, but how do you feel the preservation of biodiversity is in the US in two parts. Do you think people have separated the importance of preserving biodiversity away from the climate change issue, or do you think people talk about them in interchangeable terms? And two, how do you think you're going on that in the US?
Sure. As far as the first part of that, whether it's separated from climate change, I think it just so much depends who you're talking to and what group you're talking to. I think in some states in particular, policy-wise, they're very much coinciding. And a lot of the plans and programs that exist really have both of those in mind. They're trying to safeguard biodiversity while also planning for future changes to those habitats. Especially, I think out in the West, where we have those big mountain regions, being able to safeguard places for species to migrate elevationally, these sorts of things, I think are definitely happening. But that being said, I don't think that it's necessarily enough by any means. I think the U.S. is doing an okay job in some areas. Some states and some local areas are doing an okay job. I have noticed, for example, moving here to upstate New York from Florida, at least in the immediate area that I'm at here, it seems like when you go to state parks and wildlife areas, they seem to be very well taken care of. It's not overrunning with trash and things like that. It seems like people actually might care a little bit here. In Florida, which was my next biggest experience being in South Florida, not so much. I don't think there was definitely the conservation groups that were trying and fighting tooth and nail to protect the Everglades, Big Cypress National Preserve, and all these other state parks. I actually just saw today that the governor of Florida and the state of Florida is proposing a lot of new work in state parks. For example, there's one that they're proposing 2 18-hole golf courses, a 9-hole golf course, pickleball courts, all sorts of things totaling 1,000 acres to just be taken away from these state parks for development. So I think some places like Florida are not doing so good.
Well, that'll show the drag queens, won't it?
Right, exactly.
I don't know. Oh, Loz is down on my leg now. That was crazy. He just flew towards the green screen and realised that it's not actually a jungle or something. Now Naomi's popped in a comment. So thank you for the interesting discussion, Jeff. Yes, Jeff, thank you very much. Naomi really enjoyed it. I did too. Not a question, but a comment. A friend of mine is in Africa at the moment, and she sent photos of some of the amazing artificial nests that the researchers are making for the adorable African penguin. It's so good to see people are working so hard to protect these special birds. I hope you get to see them soon.
I think I hope so as well. The people at Sandcob and the other researchers that work with the African penguins, they have done so much. That species is really in a lot of trouble, and they're doing a lot to try and help preserve them. So amazing work by them.
Yeah, and the artificial nesting opportunities for so many penguins now is getting to be fairly well understood, I think. I mean, they're being used in New Zealand, they're being used in Australia, they're being used on several offshore islands.
Yeah, and depending on the species of penguin, it can be really, really beneficial. For example, except the little blues in Australia and in New Zealand, a lot of them use those artificial nests. Tawaki, on the other hand, do not.
Won't have a bar of it.
No, that actually, Ursula may have talked about it previously, but there's in our Milford Sound colony at Harrison Cove, there's old nest boxes that have been placed there in the past. They don't care.
Don't touch them. Yep.
No.
Well, I mean, if you're interested in Tawaki nesting preferences, go back and listen or watch the discussion I had with Ursula on YouTube, and yeah, Tawaki are pretty amazing where they decide to nest and how they excavate their nests.
Amazing places, really difficult to get into for research.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, last thing, where can people find you? Like, if
Sure.
they would like to follow your ongoing exploits, are you active on the socials? I know I found you on
Yep.
on Twitter.
Yep.
Are you using anything else? Because I know a lot of people have just given Twitter
Yeah.
away recently.
Twitter and Instagram is where I am mostly. Same handle both places. Jeff_White 618. You can find me there. I also have a website that is jeffwwhite.com, and that I'm trying to keep updated with where I'm at in these various projects as well.
Okay, well, I'll link to those in the discussions, and I'll be replaying this conversation a couple of times over the next little while. So if you didn't catch the early part of the discussion, because it was pretty early here on this side of the world, I'll play it, and I'll put the contact points for Jeff in there. And Jeff, I'm hoping to get a regular live stream. I know Seabird Saturday is a thing on Twitter with the Seabird groups. I'd like to do a regular live stream for either Seabird Saturday or Sunday. So I'll invite you when we get on, and I want to start off with everyone I've ever interviewed about seabirds at some time.
Perfect.
And kick it off, because I think live streams are great for getting people. They just stumble in and they find them,
right?
And we're only doing this to spread the words. And seabirds are probably the group. Seabirds and waders, I would say, probably are the ones that need more assistance than anything else, because hardly anybody knows about them. Hardly anyone knows anything about them, and hardly anyone ever goes to the places where they're at.
Yep. That's the thing. Seabirds, they're only, most of the species are on land for such a short amount of time each year, and then they're out at sea doing their own thing. And unfortunately for a lot of people, they're out of sight, out of mind. So whatever we can do to change that and raise awareness and action, of course, from that awareness is great. So I definitely would come back and be happy to participate in that for sure.
Great. Well, thanks for giving us so much of your Thursday evening there in upstate New York. I think the only other person that I know on YouTube or anything who is from upstate New York is a music channel. I think Rick Beato.
Okay.
I think Rick Beato, who is a guitar legend, a guitar teaching legend.
Okay.
Grew up around Ithaca, and and there's a college, isn't there, at Ithaca?
Yeah, so there's Cornell University, which is where I'm at, and there's also Ithaca College, which is more of a music school, I think.
Yeah, I think he was a professor there. I'm pretty sure I remember that right. So there we go. So
that's cool.
I often see houses, beach houses in Australia that are called Ithaca. From now, is Ithaca like fish, like the wasn't there the Ichthyosaurus or something?
I don't know. I will look it up because I don't actually have a clue. I assumed it's something. Oh, it is an island in Greece. I knew it was something Greek, but it wasn't exactly.
Okay, well then that would probably something to do with Greek mythology. There's probably
Makes sense for a beach house, I suppose. Maybe not so much for a town in the landlocked in the middle of New York, but
it doesn't really make sense for a beach house in Australia.
No.
Unless of course you're Greek.
True.
That's true. You are from the island of Ithaca.
There you go.
But it makes just as much sense to call your house Mykonos. That's another Greek island, isn't it? So, Anyway, we're getting off into the ridiculous. Jeff, it's been great to meet you. Thanks for being part of the bird emergency. Thanks for telling us so much about penguins and shags and skewers and sheathbills and Naomi, here we go. I was just going to ask you if you've seen a prothonotary warbler recently, because I'm a big fan of the prothonotary warbler.
They're on my list. I've not seen a prothonotary.
Okay, and Naomi just says she just started following you. She loves your puppy. Is it a corgi? Yes. And your tat.
Yep.
Oh, hang on. Is it the kind of tat that you can show off on?
Yeah. The dog. She was in fact a corgi. That was my dog Ruby. I don't know if we can see it on here. The tattoo is of a Tawaki. Oh, where's this camera?
I was going to ask. I hope it's a Tawaki. Oh, there we are. Super cool. Well, that's a tattoo I endorse. It's not skull and crossbone or some Celtic. Don't get me started about tattoos. I really I laugh at all these people who've got like Celtic stuff, and you know they've never been
right.
You know they can't speak Celtic,
right,
and they probably know nothing about it. But it looks cool, mate.
Right. Yeah. No, the Tawaki tattoo I got when I finished my master's. It was a present to myself.
Very good. No, I endorse that ink. Fantastic.
Good.
Well done.
Perfect.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Those of you who came through. I don't even know what to plug. We've got another next. I don't even know what my next live stream is, Jeff. So I can't even plug it. Usually I've got something to plug, but I haven't because I've got to rush off and watch the final night of the DNC.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Look, I hope I don't upset anyone, but gee, I've been loving Donald Trump crying in the last few days. It's been a delight to watch him.
Yeah, it's something.
Look, officially we've ended, but I just have to say, Jeff, did you see him crying? I've watched when I got up this morning and I put the social media on. He can't understand why suburban women don't love him because he's really very nice and he's such a good-looking man. So,
jeez,
that's great.
The last I saw was Fox News having a meltdown over Kamala Harris eating Doritos, and apparently that's a sign that she's not fit for office. I don't know.
I did see a good one today. Only a short clip, so I didn't see the whole context. But there was a Fox News panel saying it wasn't very good, it wasn't very nice because all the Democrats were being mean about Donald Trump.
Yep.
The man who has a nickname for everybody, and they're upset that people are being mean about him. Oh,
I mean,
beautiful.
I feel like it's kind of the definition of a bully, right? You can dose it out, but you can't take it.
I just love what goes around comes around.
Mm-hmm.
Look, for how many years now? We're getting on to about 8 years where I've been making fun of Americans because 47% of the voting population think this guy's a legend.
Yep.
Maybe I'll be able to stop being disappointed in your friends and neighbours, Jeff.
Look, I would love that to be true. I would love to stop being disappointed as well.
Part of the press conference about where he was saying that the suburban women love him. He also was saying, and under Joe, the rest of the world was laughing at us. Yeah. And I'm going, Donald, do you remember your great speech at the United Nations? I don't know if anyone remembers his speech to the General Assembly when the rest of the world really was laughing at you, Donald.
Yep.
Don't know. So,
it's something. It's interesting traveling as an American. Because I really started all of my field work and my international traveling started in 2017, and it's just been. I try not to bring it up most of the time.
look, everyone, we're just chewing the fat now, but I've been loving the sort of casual conversations I'm seeing on social media where people have been saying, "Oh well, if Trump wins, we'll be moving to America, moving to Australia," and I'm thinking, hey, do you guys actually know how hard it is to move here? Unless you're a scientist of the standing of someone like Jeff, you're not coming. You're not coming here.
I don't know. I am. I've been looking into not for that reason, but for career and also that's where I'd rather be. Reasons looking at moving to New Zealand, and it's just so hard.
But New Zealand's easier than Australia.
It is. It is. I looked at Australia too, and it's definitely more difficult. But yeah, New Zealand's not easy.
I mean, you would be able to come here, but you would have to secure a postdoc. You would have to secure a postdoc place.
Yeah, exactly.
Come here and then start the process.
Right.
But yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the whole world has, borders and shit. We all care about that, not just in America.
Well, there was that one. I think they were. It was an American couple. I'm pretty sure. Maybe it was a Canadian couple or family that were upset about either whether it was the U.S. or Canada. I don't remember which was getting too liberal or something, and so they moved to Russia. And well, they did. They made it there, and then they're no longer happy there.
No, I wonder why.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
People are unbelievably stupid in a lot of places, and I know that I think it's easier to immigrate to Canada than it is to New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it's harder than to Australia than New Zealand. But nowhere in the world no country in the world is saying, hey, just come here.
Yeah.
Just from wherever you are, just come here. Unless you can offer that place something, either a lot of money or particular skills.
Right.
Nowhere just wants a whole lot of other people to turn up and go, here we are. And especially maintaining, I mean, I did meet some Americans here recently who were very upset that they couldn't bring their guns. They have a very large gun collection, and they were very upset that their rights were being infringed. And I was saying, hey, no, they're not your rights.
Yeah.
They're my rights to keep your guns out. And they're going, people don't tend to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it news over there? We had an American comic has come here to do some shows, and he's very upset, and he's been venting to the world about his unfair treatment because we have agriculture and fisheries forestry dogs, quarantine dogs, that sniff you to make sure you're not bringing in stuff that will bring in pests and diseases. And he's complaining because the dog singled him out because he is a black American. I mean, fair income, get your chip off your shoulder. Those dogs go up and down everyone. Right. They're not. The dog doesn't give a stuff.
Right.
Whether you're tall, fat, skinny, doesn't care if you got Versace bags. It's mind-blowingly insane where we have come to as people. Just nuts. Well.
Yep.
Anyway, I got to cut a lot of shit off this episode. I'll tell you, mate. It's just nice to talk to people who are not crazy who live over there. So.
Well, I feel like, that's the thing. It's roll the dice here. What you're going to talk to. Not so much here, and I would say in Ithaca, so far New York has seemed a lot safer in that regard than Florida was. But
I hope you don't mind me asking this, but I'm really genuinely interested because so much of the bird research community is based in North America, obviously in the US. When you go back to your grandparents' farm in and you're in Mississippi,
Mhm.
do you feel like you have to carefully watch the conversations that you have when you're just out buying milk and
Um,
buying a paper and going out and having lunch at
sure.
having a burger and chips, you know?
I think so. For one, Mississippi does get, I think, a little bit of a worse reputation than it actually is. Like most people, it is. Don't get me wrong. There's some very interesting people with some interesting opinions, but I don't think that in general I have to do anything in particular. But it's also, I mean, that's where I grew up. So there's a degree of like uh, code switching, I guess, between being me here and me going back home. Um, so definitely, like my accent comes out stronger, and I think that is the first thing that like people would pick up on. Um, my husband and I got married in Mississippi at my family's farm, and so that whole process like was a little bit daunting to go out and like trying to buy things and like talk to people for that, like getting florists and all that sort of stuff. But we never had any issues whatsoever. So I don't think that Mississippi is actually as bad as it's portrayed. I will say where I have had issues or felt a little bit uncomfortable and had to change subjects has been in places like Florida, more than anywhere. Even in urban Miami, that's where I felt a little bit more like I have to watch what I say. I would say more so than in the South, and it's probably a little bit biased because that's where I'm from.
You can just buy a couple of Trump T-shirts to
There you go.
put it. That's your special going out gear in
Right.
downtown Miami.
Yep.
And,
Just switch over to that.
yeah, and put your Trump flag on the back of your of your car. Mate, it's crazy, isn't it?
It's interesting. There was a whole what was it? The last election, we were going to vote, and we ended up just waiting and going at a different time because there was this massive caravan of Trump supporters going down the road in their massive trucks with flags everywhere, people like all sorts of horrendous signs supporting Trump, and some even people like with their guns and stuff. And I'm like, you can't. That's a little far.
But that's the extremism that I think. I mean, watching from over here, my housemate says to me all the time, "Why are you watching all this?" And going, "Hey, I don't know if you've noticed that all the shit that they were saying in America 4 years ago, our right-wing political parties are recycling all that now. They've been doing it in Britain.
Yep.
It's only unless we knock it off, it comes in. There's these lunatics everywhere. But I'm really hoping. There's a rumor that Taylor Swift is going to be performing at the DNC.
Yeah.
There is an open slot that hasn't been advertised for who's speaking.
Right.
And the rumor is that Taylor Swift and perhaps Beyonce are going to be doing a spot tonight. Now, that would smash it out of the park.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if Swifties, and are you a Swiftie?
Not so much. I'm not in Swifties, but
I've been very mad at Taylor about her private jet use.
Yeah.
Especially been very mad at Taylor about that. But she would redeem herself in my eyes if she could assist at least sending the Trumpmobile, back to the 1950s where it belongs, and that it could take another 70 years to catch up to us again. And I'm sorry if you don't want to talk about this, but I love having the opportunity to speak to someone who's living it now and that isn't talking politics for a living, because you get that's what you get to find all the time. But is the country broken? Like, is it going to take a long time? Like, is the country broken, do you think? Like, is it split into this,
prior to Kamala Harris kind of rising up as the nominee and seeing all of the support from actually coming from both sides now for her, I would have said 100%. But I think it's becoming more clear that still that radical side is in fact the minority. Like most people, there's not enough. It's not that like half the country wants that, right? So I think that there definitely are some major problems or some major flaws with our system in particular.
Well, did you know this? This is something I only learned recently. Did you know that in terms of the Senate, now for where you live now in New York, someone in Montana, their vote in the Senate is about 35 times more powerful than yours.
Yeah.
Because every state gets the same amount of senators.
Yep.
And well, I think it's probably more even for New York. I think it was one of the other states I've been compared to, but Montana doesn't even have 1 million people in it. I think it's got like 350,000 people or something in it.
I'm not sure how many it had. I know it's fairly low.
Think voters. Voters. Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the problem with like the electoral college. I think is it's an outdated.
That's the point.
Yeah, it's such an outdated system, and also the way the votes come in, of course, across the country. By the time you get to some of those small states that the votes don't matter as much, like it just doesn't really matter, I guess, for them, and it's not a great system.
Our Senate system here is fairly undemocratic, but at least if you get the popular vote in a state and in certainly in our we don't have a president system, obviously, but generally, well, actually, it's not really even true here, even though ours is less crap than the electoral college. But whenever the Liberals are in power, they never win the majority of the vote.
Right.
They have to team up with a party which has a whole lot of gerrymandering advantages in itself to actually get a majority. But Naomi asked, did you see the AI, the Trump stuff on Truth Social and Twitter where he had all the AI Swifties for Trump and all that? That was pretty funny. Apparently that's got Taylor so mad that she has that she's agreed to turn up.
I mean, she should. That was an interesting strategy on their part to think that would slide through without major pushback from her.
Yeah. They want to get rid of the Chevron deference. That doctrine has been knocked down by the Supreme Court. Does that make a huge problem for conservation in the states, regardless of what happens with the general election and
I mean, the power to be able to do much conservation-wise has been going down for a while. There's a lot got taken away in the Trump administration that really hasn't come back. So it seems like they're just slowly chipping away. Now, if it goes the way that we don't want it to go this election, it's just going to get stripped away completely. But as it is right now, I think that it definitely poses some challenges. But I don't think we're at quite crisis point at this point. And it seems like, in theory, that if we get a Harris-Walz administration, that hopefully that'll, at least in some way, start trying to be resolved. Some. We'll see.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed. Thanks for dipping into all that.
Of course.
Don't worry, I'll edit all this out so that you don't get lots of hate mail.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the kind of crazy shit that goes on. But Coach Walls, Coach Walls. I
Hmm.
never thought I'd be keen on a US football. I mean football. Come on. Um,
No, he
we
seems great though. He seems great.
Now you're not tall enough to be a a, a, a big footballer in your college days, were
Not
you,
at all.
Jeff? No, no, no.
No,
He's got it.
I never was much of a sports player anyway. Never was very good at it.
Now,
I showed horses. That was it.
is tight end prop? That's a rugby term, I think, isn't it? That's not a football term. Yeah, not an NFL term. Yeah,
Not that I know of.
I'm displaying my love and knowledge of NFL for you.
Okay.
Jeff. All right, mate. Well, thanks so much for staying up late and talking politics and occasional bird stories
Of course.
with me. If when you're coming back over here, if you're coming back to Australia, let me know.
Absolutely.
Let me know so we can maybe get a whole lot of bird nerds together and go and find you an orange-bellied parrot or something.
That would be great. I haven't been.
Or a night parrot.
There you go. Like get your childhood dreams all in one.
That's right. I was just suddenly thinking yesterday I have to follow up. I haven't spoken to Neil Hamilton for ages, so I might try and get out on one of his trips soon. And I'd love to go bird watching with you. And actually, I'd love to come over and I'd love to come to the States, although I'm too scared to go to the States yet.
Wait a little bit, maybe.
I want to see some gun law changes because,
Yeah.
and I'm genuine about this.
Yeah.
Like people say to me, "Aren't you worried about going to the Philippines or Indonesia? They're quite dangerous." I'm going, "Hang on, have you thought about America? I mean, if you're going to talk about dangerous places, you're likely to be going to buy a Coke and just get shot." But yeah, I'd love to go in Illinois and find a prothonotary warbler with my my friend Jared.
We have them in Mississippi as well. I never saw them. We don't have enough swamp. I live up in more upland habitat, but they're on my list. I would love to see prothonotaries. There's some beautiful, beautiful warblers here. Definitely worth a visit.
We'll put that on the bucket list trip.
There you go.
So, yeah.
There you go.
All right, mate. Thanks a bunch. I look forward to catching up with you for a Seabird Saturday or Seabird Sunday.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk more about the Falklands when you when are you planning to get there?
I get there. My flight leaves London January 6th, so 7th I think is when I'll get to the Falklands, and then I'm there till mid-March.
Oh, so you won't be in America for the Jan 6 anniversary?
No, I'm not here for that. I'm not here for Election Day either, so I'm trying to figure out now how to do early voting in New York.
Oh, well, the court just said you can, so you
Perfect.
can do it by mail too. So
Perfect. That'll be good.
yeah, so get on out to that. Good luck.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, mate. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks, Naomi, for your comments. Oh, I better just check before I let you go. No, nobody said. Nobody left a question or a comment on Instagram. They're always tardy.
Well, anybody can send me if they have questions. Send me questions on Instagram, email, whatever. Happy to talk more.
Cool. Well, we'll see you soon, Jeff.
All right.
Appreciate the incredible amount of time that you've given to myself and Loz this morning.
Of course.
See ya.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.